Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Juvenile Justice Home-Based Initiative Judicial webinar. Today, we're going to talk about a few different components of the Juvenile Justice Home-Based Initiative as it pertains to the judicial and legal stakeholders involved in our program. So first, we're going to go through a high-level overview of the Juvenile Justice Home-Based Initiative. Following that, we'll talk through some of the services that are inherent in the Juvenile Justice Home-Based Initiative, such as multi-systemic therapy and the Boys Town Ecological In-Home Family Treatment Model. We'll look at a bench guide, and then we'll go through the target population and youth most appropriate for these in-home services, as well as discuss the covered service areas, what the probation process looks like, and then address any further questions. So the Juvenile Justice Home-Based Initiative is a Supreme Court initiative that's being implemented by the Court Improvement Project and the Administrative Office of Probation, particularly the Juvenile Services Division. There are a few main purposes of the initiative, and they are to reduce the number of out-of-home placements for justice-involved youth, serve families in their homes, stabilize homes, and connect youth and families with supports in the community and other resources. One of the big pieces of the Juvenile Justice Home-Based Initiative is to reduce the number of out-of-home placements for youth in Nebraska. And to do that, we want to make sure that we're also offering better accessibility to in-home services and other ways to ensure that the youth is supported and the family is supported in the home and in the community. So with the Juvenile Justice Home-Based Initiative, there are two components. One component, like I just mentioned, is the in-home service implementation. And to start off, we are focusing on two different types of services: multi-systemic therapy, also known as MST, and the Boys Town Ecological In-Home Family Treatment Program, and that is EIHFT, or I may refer to it as the Boys Town model as we go through this webinar. The other component to the initiative is education and stakeholder engagement. And we plan to engage stakeholders through things such as webinars like this one, educational materials, stakeholder meetings, evaluations, and any kind of meeting or information that we can push out to make sure that everybody is aware of what this initiative is doing and the good that it's doing in our state. So first, we're going to talk through what these services actually look like and what they're focused on, and we will get into the nittier, grittier part of what youth are appropriate for the service after we kind of give that overview. And so first, I want to talk about MST, which is multi-systemic therapy. It is a community-based, family-driven treatment for justice-involved youth, and it really focuses on the family as the solution. The service is targeted at helping the youth stay in the home, but a lot of the pieces of the service are targeted at the parents and the caregivers. There's a strong track record of client engagement, retention, and satisfaction, and one of the hallmarks of MST is that the therapist must have a lead clinical role. MST has a 30-plus year track record of proven results, and they have done comprehensive statewide implementation in 7 different states, but it's also available in 34 states total, as well as 15 countries. So it is an evidence-based practice with results, and it has been shown to work and shown to create really good outcomes for kids, families, and communities. What MST looks like as far as the service goes is that there's a single therapist who works intensively with 4 to 6 families at any given time. The MST teams include one supervisor who oversees 2 to 4 therapists depending on the basis of that team. And the treatment time for each therapist working with an individual family is 3 to 5 months, and the national and international average is about 4 months. Services provided in the community, home, school, and neighborhood. There's a big focus on involving those community supports and utilizing those community resources with MST, and a lot of the service is looking at how those parents and those youth and those caregivers can connect with the community. Another big piece of MST is that families can reach the therapist 24/7. This is really important because it is an intensive therapy, and it's a high-level therapy. And even if the individual therapist who's been working with the family is not available 24/7, one member of that MST team with the supervisor and the team of therapists will be available in worst-case scenarios. And one of the hallmarks of having those MST teams is that all of the other therapists know at least what's going on with each of the families. So if they do need to respond during that 24/7 window, they still have some awareness of what's going on in that individual family. MST expected outcomes can really be focused on 3 different things: whether or not the youth is in the home, in school, and out of trouble. And so kind of breaking that down into what those expected outcomes look like, MST focuses on the youth remaining in the home, improving school attendance and performance, peer relations improves. One of the big focuses of MST is making sure that the youth is working with and interacting with pro-social peers as opposed to antisocial peers. There should be a decrease in behavior problems, a reduction in recidivism, and a decrease in substance abuse. One of the big things to remember with MST is that these expected outcomes are after 3 to 5 months of intensive work. And so not necessarily that you can expect everything to improve to 100% and there are no more behavior problems and there's no more issues with the law and there's no more substance abuse, but making sure that during those 3 to 5 months there's a decrease in all of those problem areas, and the parents and the caregivers and the family and the community at large know how to support that youth to make sure that those improvements continue. So next we're going to talk about the Boys Town EIHFT and that model. You're going to see a lot of similarities between Boys Town's model and MST's model, and that is by design and it's on purpose, but there are some important distinctions which I will get into a little bit later. So Boys Town is a structured, strengths-based service designed to address risk factors and behavior issues. It aims at promoting long-term family stability and healthy developmental functioning of the youth and the family. Interventions utilized include things like risk management, safety planning, identifying community resources, and a lot of other ways to connect the family and the youth with the community and provide support on how to best provide care for that youth. The service overview includes, again, will look really similar to MST's model, but a family consultant will work with up to 6 families at any given time. The one key differentiating factor between the Boys Town model and MST is that Boys Town utilizes family consultants, and these do not have to be master's level therapists. They can be bachelor's level, and it's not therapeutic work, and that is the big difference. However, it is still an intensive in-home treatment, and it is providing for these families. And Boys Town, when they were developing this model, one of the things they wanted to focus on is ensuring that this model could be replicated in more rural areas, such as Nebraska's more western and central areas of the state, to make sure that the service could be available due to workforce issues and ensuring that they couldn't necessarily get all master's level. But the family consultants for Boys Town's model are highly trained, and they have there's a lot of oversight in ensuring that they are meeting the proper needs of the family and the youth. And so the service frequency looks about 4 hours a week on average of that time interacting with the family and youth. Similar to MST, there's a typical time frame of about 3 to 6 months working with that family intensively. The work is done in the community, home, school, and neighborhood, and the family consultants are available to the families 24/7. So some of the expected outcomes for the Boys Town model include the families remaining intact, youth residing in the home, youth having improved relationships with peers and adults, youth attending school or will have graduated, and youth ages 13 and older will be arrest-free at the 6 and 12-month follow-up marks, which is pretty important. So now I'm just going to show you this bench guide that was put together by the folks in Probation Administration, the Juvenile Services Division, that kind of gives you a really great and clear layout of MST and the Boys Town model and what those focus areas are, the target population, the exclusionary criteria, and the length of intervention. We'll provide this document along with the slides for this webinar after the fact, but just so you know, we do have this available and you will be getting this. So now I want to talk about the target population. And I'll go through MST and Boys Town, and then we'll talk through the exclusionary population. So the MST target population is for youth ages 12 to 17, and it has to be youth who are at risk for placement due to antisocial or delinquent behaviors, including substance abuse. They have to be involved in the juvenile justice system because MST is really normed on the juvenile justice system and not necessarily that child welfare piece. And youth who have committed sexual offenses in conjunction with other antisocial behavior. I'll talk a little bit more about that piece during the exclusionary criteria section for MST, but just know that it has to be in conjunction with other antisocial behavior. One thing to note is that with MST, this program can be utilized for those youth returning home from out-of-home placement if they are returning home within 2 weeks. One of the main things that you need to focus on is whether or not that youth is in the home. And so if they're coming back from a detention center or a group home, this can be utilized, but the timing is very important in making that determination. So for the Boys Town target population, it looks pretty similar. So it's ages 12 to 17, youth identified as having multiple risks, moderate to high risk youth and families that are involved in the juvenile justice system. Again, this is a juvenile justice focused program. And families that have experienced child abuse, neglect, substance abuse, curfew violations, or truancy, contributing to that instability in the home. And then parents who have lost the motivation to parent, especially with those older youth. Now we're going to talk about the exclusionary criteria. So MST's exclusionary criteria focus on youth living independently, because if they're not in the home, the entire program doesn't really work because it's really focused on the youth and the families, the caregivers, and the community all being in on it together. Another exclusionary criteria is sex offending in the absence of other antisocial behavior. MST actually has a specific program focused entirely on sex offending youth, but that is not the one being implemented in the state at that time. If there is sex offending in conjunction with other antisocial behavior, that youth would still likely be appropriate if they meet all of the other inclusionary criteria and are excluded by something else. MST is not appropriate for youth with moderate to severe autism because that's not what the focus of the program is. Any youth who is actively homicidal, suicidal, or psychotic is not appropriate. And for those youth whose psychiatric problems are the primary reason leading to referral, those youth are not appropriate. Obviously, there may be some psychiatric problems inherent in a lot of the youth who are involved, but if that's the primary reason leading to referral, that's not the appropriate referral. Boys Towns is relatively similar, and so youth living independently are not appropriate for the service. Similarly to that, youth residing in a long-term residential setting are not appropriate, and then actively homicidal, suicidal, or psychotic youth, again, are not appropriate for the service. So next I want to talk through the MST implementation sites, and then I'll talk through the Boys Town implementation sites. So MST is currently offered in the state of Nebraska by Mid-Plains Center, based out of the Grand Island and Lincoln offices, and they have been offering MST since the 90s. During this first phase of the initiative, the implementation providers will be based in Omaha and Norfolk, alongside with still Mid-Plains continuing to offer their services out of Grand Island and Lincoln. And so during that first phase, we have Paradigm and Boys Town who will be offering MST services out of their offices in Omaha. And then in Norfolk, we have Good Life Counseling who will be offering MST services there. During the second phase, which I'll talk about a little bit later, Omaha will be adding teams as necessary, and we'll be identifying whether or not we need to add additional teams in Lincoln as well. So here is a service map, and again, this is just for MST services during that first phase for implementation. And so you can see in the orange, we have the coverage area covered by the Norfolk team. The blue area is the area covered by the Omaha teams. Yellow is the teams based out of Lincoln, and then we have the green area. The green area is for the team's coverage area for Grand Island. And so MST has a rule with their implementation that the therapist must be able to reach the families within a 90-minute response time. For the state of Nebraska, we equated about the 90-minute response time to about a 60-mile radius as far as drive time, because especially once you get more out into the central part of the state, that drive time pretty much equates to a mile. And so we have about a 60-minute radius here. There are some parts of the counties that are further, but these are the counties that are within the catchment areas. For those areas that are further out than 60 miles but still might be shaded in here, that is up to the providers and the probation staff to figure out exactly if they can make that work within the other families they have at any given time. This does not guarantee service, and I'll discuss this a little bit later with probation and service process as far as what that kind of looks like for identifying which families get the service first and how far out those teams go. But this is just a good visualization of how much we're covering with this phase 1 of MST implementation. Next, we have the Boys Town model's expansion. So Boys Town currently offers their model out of the Omaha, North Platte, and Grand Island offices. During this phase 1 of the initiative, we hope to expand the availability of the model in the North Platte and Grand Island offices. And moving into phase 2, we hope that we can replicate the Boys Town model with a new provider out in the Scottsbluff-Gary area. And we have a map coming on that, and we will send that out as soon as we have it complete. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the probation processes and what that looks like from probation side and how that will interact with the courts. So prior to any recommendation to the court, the probation officer is going to do a few things. First, they're going to determine if the family or youth are appropriate for this type of intensive in-home services. And then before they do anything else, they're going to discuss those options with the family and youth. One of the really important pieces of both the Boys Town model and MST is that the families are willing to be a part of the service, and they're willing to open their home to these therapists and these family consultants. So if there's not family buy-in, they can't guarantee that this is going to work at all. Once the probation officer has discussed those options with the family and youth, they're going to complete a screening and referral form that has been created by the Juvenile Services Division and has gone through some testing. And on that screening and referral form, there are some scoring pieces of that. And so the probation officers shall complete screening forms on juvenile community-based intervention youth that present one or more of the following characteristics: imminent risk of out-of-home placement, complex family functioning impacting youth success, high service utilization with little or no progress, and then a pattern of problematic behavior across settings. And so there are going to be different scoring categories once they go through the entire screening and referral form. And so there are going to be youth that aren't appropriate for either of the intensive in-home services such as MST or the Boys Town model. Then those more moderate risk youth are going to be recommended for that Boys Town model if they have different options. Then there will be a scoring range for MST. And then finally, there's going to be a high priority MST. If there are youth who are at the most imminent risk of out-of-home placements and they are scoring high across all of these factors on the screening form, they're going to be placed as high priority because we know that they need to get these services as soon as possible before they're placed out of home. After completing that screening form and getting the score, the probation officer will make a recommendation to the court. And so one of the questions that we were asked as we were developing this webinar and looking through what we needed to provide judges as well as the rest of the legal community with is what would be suggested court order language for this. And so the team put together the suggestion, and it will say the juvenile and family shall participate with intensive in-home family services as directed by probation. This phraseology gives some flexibility based on openings and provider willingness to travel, et cetera. And that's really important to make sure that we can get the youth any type of in-home services that they need based on their scoring and what the probation officer knows about that family. So once the recommendation is made, there's still the issue of service availability. So there are certainly those counties that fit within each catchment area, but there may be portions of those counties that are covered by the service that may not be able to be reached at any given time. Providers do have the flexibility to go beyond the designated counties if they so choose to serve those families. It may impact the ability of drive time and the response time, but they definitely have that flexibility to go beyond those designated counties and go a little bit further if there may be some families that have a really high need for this service. One of the things we expect is that there's going to be a wait list at first. We strategically chose to start with a smaller number of teams so we could build out based on need and utilization, and we want to make sure that these services are going to be sustainable, and so we didn't want to add too many teams initially to make in case we couldn't keep them filled based on our current processes. And so with the service wait list, there's going to be that high priority screening form, and those high priority youth are going to be placed at the top of that wait list because we know that if they don't get the service, they're probably going to be placed out of home, and we want to do as much as possible to avoid that situation. There's a referral management process that we are overseeing, and it is highly calculated to ensure that we're doing this in the best way possible. We have a different lead in each of the catchment areas, and that is a juvenile justice resource supervisor who will be managing the referrals and going through the wait list and then sending those off to the providers. The providers in these lead JJRSs have a good working relationship, and they're in communication to ensure that those providers are getting families and those probation officers are completing those referral forms and ensuring that we're getting youth into the service and providing the best outcomes. Service availability is going to be a huge, huge factor as far as what phase 2 implementation looks like. If we realize that we need 1 to 2 to 3 more teams in any given area, that's going to change what that kind of training looks like and how much that availability of the service is going to grow. And so we are doing weekly and monthly trackings of the utilization of all of these services to ensure that we know how much is being used, how much we could expect it to grow, and how much use we can expect it to grow. We're looking at that next phase probably in 4 to 6 to 7 months, so we can maybe see how that first stage of completion looks like and what those outcomes are looking like for the youth, so we can ensure that we're providing a good service for this. So if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer those. I do have a few prepared based on questions that I've been getting from judges and other stakeholders. And so one of the questions that I've been getting, particularly in the more metro areas, is how does MST and the Boys Town model compare to IFP, which is Intensive Family Preservation? And so one of the things to keep in mind is that IFP, although it is an intensive family service, it's really normed more on that child welfare side. And the importance and the big factor related to MST and the Boys Town model is that both of those are focused on the juvenile justice population, which is that population that the entire initiative is focused on. And so there are different purposes for all three of those. And so that is one factor. Another question is how long, and I kind of addressed this earlier, but how long until that second phase and then we add new teams? We are keeping this at about 4 to 6 months out because we really want to make sure that we're getting those results from the teams, the providers, and the families and youth to ensure that we can identify what is working really well. Is there something that we need to fix before we add more teams? And so that is sort of a piece of that second phase implementation. So for more information, I provided my email address for the state, my phone number, the website and web page that includes a lot of the information about the Juvenile Justice Home-Based Initiative. There are links to Boys Town's website, there are links to MST's website, there are video links, there are informational guides, and there will be a lot more things coming out as we go through this implementation. And following this webinar, we will be sure to send out the slides, the bench guides, and any other materials mentioned. We are happy to come and speak with you or your team one-on-one or schedule calls to discuss more specific information. We want this to be an open line of communication as we implement these services throughout the state. There is an incredible amount of organizational support for this program and this initiative, and we intend to see it succeed. There will be weekly meetings with providers and probation administration to ensure utilization and troubleshooting. And as we have seen in a lot of former and previous statewide implementations, there might be some bumps in the road, but we are really committed to this initiative and to providing these resources for families and youth in Nebraska. And that is not something that we take lightly. We are very excited to partner with all of you as we go through this endeavor. And so please do not hesitate to reach out if you see something that's working really well that we should highlight, or if something might be a little bumpy and we need to figure out a better process for it. So I'd like to thank you for taking your time today to watch this webinar. And with that, I will say goodbye. So thank you.